Hello, I am Jamellia Perkins and welcome to my digital coaching portfolio. This is my 8th school year as a Jefferson County Public School employee and my 5th year as a certified classroom teacher. For the past 4 years, I was a second grade teacher. However, now I have the privilege of becoming an ECE resource teacher at my current school, Cochran Elementary School. Cochran is a Title I inner city school located in the heart of old downtown Louisville in the Jefferson County Public School System. Cochran is also a professional development school that works closely with the University of Louisville. According to KDE's school report card, the total student population is right at 342 students, ranging from pre-K to 5th grade. The student population breakdown is as follows: 28% Caucasian, 55% African American, 8% Hispanic, 3% Asian, 0.3% Native Hawaiian, and 5.3% consist of 2 or more races. 92.7% of the school population are on free and reduced lunch. Our school was just recently categorized as a priority school. We are now a priority school due to the student growth category on the state assessment. Although our students showed growth in some areas, they did not meet the projected growth levels that they should have shown. According to K-Prep, MAP, and school-wide common formative assessment data, it is evident that students at Cochran Elementary struggle in ELA, more specifically with reading comprehension. Our school's K-Prep results reveal that we are negative 26.6 points behind compared to the state average. This in which puts us at being 41% novice in reading as a school. This means we are 9% away from half of our students who cannot read effectively. With this in mind, we see that as a school, we needed to do something differently to help our students learn to read. As a result, we are opening the doors of our school an hour earlier for students to receive extra help in reading. We've opened a new reading lab, invested over $20,000 for the iRead program for students K through 2. Teachers are utilizing a reading program titled Read Theory. Students participate in intense interventions based on their tier levels, as well as a school-wide all hands on deck, which every adult that is not a classroom teacher that's in the school building will team up with a classroom teacher in order to provide small group reading and interventions from 10 to 11 a.m. daily. For my coaching project, I decided to coach and work closely with my colleague, Charlesetta Parker. Mrs. Parker and I have worked within the same school building for the past 4 years. However, it wasn't until over the summer that we began to form a closer relationship as we learned that she would be joining the second grade team. As I learned more about Mrs. Parker, I noticed that we both came from the middle school background prior to becoming an elementary school teacher. Before, she worked at T.T. Knight Middle School as an instructional assistant. She then began the Alternative Certification Elementary and Secondary Program, also called ACES, within the JCPS school system. She began her first year as a 5th grade teacher. She then went on to teaching 4th grade the following year. Her 3rd year, she looped back up to 5th grade with her students. Now, as her 4th year teacher, she is now a 2nd grade teacher. Prior to the school year beginning, Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Lasley, our other teammate, and I worked closely with one another as we planned our lessons for the first few weeks of school for our 2nd graders. This was a new experience for Mrs. Parker, as she is used to teaching middle school and then 4th and 5th grade students. During the 2nd week of school, I was repositioned within my school as an ECE resource teacher. With this sudden change, I still ensured Mrs. Parker that I would still be around to assist her in any way I could if needed. As I began planning for my coaching project, I believe that Mrs. Parker and I could both benefit from working with one another as we focused on one common goal, and that is the success of our students at our school. Mrs. Parker had many questions and concerns about our reading program that we utilized in the 2nd grade and how we taught whole group and small group reading. which was different from what and how she taught in the upper grade levels. From there, we met during our common planning at least twice a week and discussed ways to conduct whole group instruction as well as small group instruction. Mrs. Parker was able to observe me teaching a small group in my classroom on several occasions in the You Watch Me model as stated in the Gym Night instructional coaching textbook. After 2.5 weeks of working with one another, it brought us to our pre-observation conference. As a result of closely working with Mrs. Parker since the beginning of the school year, I pretty much had a feel for her class, but the overall goal of this meeting was to discuss and give vital information about the class that may or may not affect the lesson being taught. In our pre-observation meeting, I learned I would be observing a ELA lesson focused on context clues. This lesson will build on their reading comprehension skills. This lesson will be a whole group reteach as students needed extra practice based upon their previous exit slip. There are 3 students who have an IEP and 1 student who has a 504 plan who is also gifted and talented, as well as she hopes to get proper feedback and ideas that she can use with her students in order to strengthen her as a teacher. Hello, I am Jamellia Perkins, and this is my EDU 604 project activity that I'm doing on my co-teaching experience. Beside me, I have my friend and colleague, Jamellia Parker. We both currently work at Cochran Elementary within the JCPS school system. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, Ms. Parker?
I've been with JCPS since 2010. This is my 4th year teaching at Cochran, and I am currently teaching the 2nd grade.
All right, great. I will be observing Ms. Parker doing her ELA lesson, and I think her lesson is on context clues. So can you identify your student learning targets for this particular lesson that I will be observing?
Students will be able to determine the meaning of words based on the context or based on the text.
Okay. To which part of your curriculum does this lesson relate to?
Reading and language arts.
All right, so your ELA and reading. All right. How does this learning fit in the sequence of learning for this class?
It helps the students to build on their reading. They're able to determine the meaning of words as they're reading and be able to identify or become more fluent in their reading because they understand the words.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so I've stepped into your classroom on several occasions. However, for the purposes of this video, could you briefly describe the students in your class, including those with special needs that may need some specializations, such as their IEPs or so on and so forth?
I have 25 students in my classroom. I have 2 with IEPs in the classroom. 2 are resourced in reading, and then I also have 1 student that has a 504, and it is basically for behavior. In order to keep him on task, I make sure that he has extra work because he is also gifted and talented. He has extra work above grade level to keep him focused and to keep him engaged.
Okay. All right, so that moves right along to my next question. How will you engage the students in their learning during this activity?
Engaging the students, I always intro, or most of the time I intro with a video, and the video is vocabulary, so it gets them engaged with the song. And then I do a cutout lesson, which is in their reading notebook, where we actually have hands-on working. And then we start reading and doing some interactive work with our reading and with the smartboard.
Okay. All right. So, and I think you kind of touched on my next question before. How will you differentiate instruction for those individuals or groups of students who are struggling, or those students who are on grade level, or those students like your student with the 504 plan in the gifted and talented student, how will you differentiate the instruction?
So once after we go over whole group lesson, we break into small groups, and in breaking into small groups, that's when I'm more able to individualize the lessons on grade levels or on levels of reading.
Okay. How and when will you know whether the students have achieved the learning target?
I do a pre-assessment before each standard, and also do a post-assessment, and that way I'm able to see if the student was able to grasp what we were learning. If not, then I go back and reteach.
Okay. And my last question for you, is there anything that you would like me to specifically observe during the lesson while you're teaching your lesson on context clues?
I would say just focus on the whole.
As I entered the classroom, Mrs. Parker was going over her students' expectations. Students were sitting quietly and listening to her for the most part. This is something that I admire of her, and I feel it is great that prior to the beginning any lesson, she sets the tone with her expectations that she has for every learner. Afterwards, she began reading the students' I can statements. I noticed that there seemed to be a few students who were off task. However, Miss Parker stopped and waited for their undivided attention. She proceeded with her lesson by asking students to get out their ready Common Core books that they frequently worked out of. She did this for a small review of what they did the day before she continued with her reteach of her lesson. Some students seemed to be engaged while others were not. As Miss Parker noticed that, she pulled up an interactive lesson on her smartboard as we had discussed briefly before the lesson. During the portion of instruction, the students were very engaged as they were eager to go to the board and participate during the lesson. This was a big change from reviewing and working out of their notebooks. Afterwards, students were able to work in their interactive reading notebooks at their desks for independent practice as she circulated around the room. After the ELA lesson, I gave time for Miss Parker to reflect before meeting to discuss my observations. As we met, Mrs. Parker felt that she did well overall during the lesson. However, some students still did not grasp the concepts of context clues. I recommended to her that she should teach those students in a small group setting during their guided reading time. I also noted to make it fun for the students, maybe in a game-like format. I dug into my ELA resources in my classroom and provided Mrs. Parker with a context clue memory game that she could play among her students who still struggled. As we continued to review the students' exit slips, we found that 88% of the students were able to grasp the concept of context clues after the reteach lesson that I observed. Before that reteach, only 40% knew how to identify context clues. We discussed things that she did differently the second time around that she didn't do the first time. Mrs. Parker explained that she took my advice and incorporated more technology and hands-on experiences for the students through the interactive smartboard activity. This engaged the students more so than just the regular paper pencil concept. I also suggested that she break down her lesson into several parts because her original reteach lesson was pretty lengthy, and students became restless as her review lasted 12 minutes, interactive smartboard activity lasted 40 minutes, and independent work lasted 20 minutes. In our meeting, I suggested that in the future lessons she may want to review for 5 minutes, then conduct a mini lesson for 15 minutes that may include the interactive activity, and then take the rest of the time to rotate and work in small groups to ensure that every student knows the information being taught. I mentioned during this time she could take advantage of her gifted student who easily gets bored with second grade material who would disturb others, that he could partner up and help a student or students who are struggling. She could also set up learning centers within the classroom that focuses on the reading strategy. Overall, I agree with Mrs. Parker when she stated that her students struggle with ELA strategies. From my own experiences as a second grade teacher, context clues are not an easy concept to teach to our students. I believe that the other 12% of her students who still did not learn the concept effectively will do so in the next couple of school days with a few more small group rotations in the classroom. I would say that this has been quite an experience working with my colleague as an instructional coach. This has opened my eyes to what an instructional coach really does. I believe that this project has indeed brought me out of my shell and is just the beginning of being an effective leader within my school building. Thank you for watching.